मेरा तो बस लाइव जाना है ना आपको।
लाइव हो चुका है सर। आपको बस वो कनेक्ट करना है।
जो पहले तो एसी बंद।
हाँ चलो बंद करता हूँ।
A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If the audio is clear and available. Thank you. So, hello, a very warm good evening to all of you, and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IS. Welcome to today's webinar, where we shall be talking about the important issues of environment and ecology, which have been in news in the past month almost, which is relevant both for your prelims as well as the areas which are relevant for your mains examination. We are going to hold a discussion for those topics in detail. Okay. Now, before we talk about the topics in detail, an announcement for all of you. Most of you would be aware that we have already begun or initiated the prelims test series. So, as this test series goes on, kindly do appear for these test series. This is for your practice. Please don't worry how much marks you end up scoring as of now. What is your scoreability or what is the negative, etc., that you do? Just get your mind conditioned for those particular 2 hours and then evaluate and gauge your performance accordingly. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for. So, first of all, we are going to discuss briefly about Conference of Parties 28, COP28 to UNFCCC, which was recently concluded in UAE in Dubai. Amidst a lot of fanfare, a lot of controversy around the inclusion of fossil fuels or the lack of a kind of a fixed timeline when to find out or when to eventually phase out the fossil fuels, COP28 was in news. You would have read it in your news stories and your current affairs analysis as well. But here we will have a gist, a final brief gist about the discussions of COP28. So, this is going to be relevant for your mains exam. Okay. Then Climate Change Performance Index 2024, the report has been released. This is going to be relevant for your prelims preparation. At the end of each of these topics, depending upon the relevance in prelims or mains or dual relevance, we will take up the questions, sample questions along with that also. Global climate report has been released by World Meteorological Organization for the decade encompassing 2011 to 2020. This is again something that we are going to look into. This is relevant both for your prelims as well as for your mains. That is where it will have a twin relevance involved. Then Winter Arctic Expedition has been launched by India for the first time. There is an Indian expedition going to the Arctic region around the area of Svalbard. So, that in itself is a momentous occasion. But what is the relevance of that Arctic expedition? What is the requirement or what are the various scientific findings that the Arctic expedition is expected to bring to us in return? That is something which is again going to be relevant for the portion of mains. Then Carbon Capture Policy Framework, Carbon Capture Utilization and Storage CCUS policy framework has been devised by Niti Aayog. So, the prospect of carbon capture, utility, and storage, what is it? What is its prospect in India? What are the challenges, applications of it? Largely relevant for your mains examination again. Okay. Then, State of Finance for Nature report. This has been released recently. Again, relevant for your prelims here. Then Global Cooling Watch, again another report relevant for your prelims. And there has been a chum salmon migration where the species of chum salmon has been found to be breeding in the Arctic waters. So what are these particular unique species and That is something that we are going to look into. And what is it that they're hatching or breeding in the Arctic waters? What does that indicate? Such species which breed in fresh water and then grow up in saline and salt water, like your Hilsa fish also, they are known by a different name. So what is that name? That is something we'll take a look into. So these are the various issues that basically we are going to look into detail today. Few of the topics we are going to discuss in greater detail, for example, conference of parties, for example, Arctic expedition, and the prelims topics. The PPT itself, the written portion in the PPT in itself is going to be sufficient for your reference purposes. So starting with the conference of parties number 28. Now, what is a conference of party? When we talk about COP or a conference of party, what is it? So basically, this conference of party, that is generally the highest decision making body of any particular convention. Any convention is what? Convention is a kind of a grouping of member nations, organizations, etc., where they aim to achieve a larger goal. So that is what a convention is. So in a convention, there is a particular goal that is set. Okay? There's a particular goal that is set that people want to achieve. And in order to achieve this goal, they basically work towards achieving this goal. And that is where you'll find that you have a convention to achieve that. Now, it is about achievement of the goal, but you need a timely achievement target also. That, let's suppose the goal here is, let's assume the goal is to reduce the warming of the planet by 2 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial era. We don't have to let the temperature of the planet exceed 2 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial era. That is the goal. But how do you achieve that? So for that, you had a timely target setting about reduction in greenhouse gases emission. And that is where a convention generally is associated with a protocol. Okay? That is where it is associated with a kind of a protocol. Now, Ilma, you have had I remember you attended the sessions of environment. So in those PPT that I had provided, you have the difference of convention, etc., and everything, isn't it? So just refer to that. Having said that, when we talk about a convention, convention is basically to achieve a larger goal or an objective. How do you achieve that? A timely small goal setting which is done to achieve that larger objective, that is a protocol. Now, in 1992, you had the Global Summit on 5th and 6th of June, which was to talk about how to combat the various different threats that the planet is facing, what we refer to as the Rio Summit of 1992. Rio Summit or the Earth Summit of 1992. Now, this Rio Summit or the Earth Summit, basically, of 1992, had 3 different documents and 3 conventions which were finalized here. Amongst the 3 conventions, when we talk about 3 conventions, you had 3 different conventions, that is United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, Is the color of the pen fine or is the color problematic? It is fine? Okay. So biological diversity, what is also referred to as CBD. Then you had United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. to combat desertification, UNCCD, and the most important one was to combat climate change, and that was United Nations Framework Convention, on climate change. Now, it was identified lot earlier itself. Now, this is also what is known as UNFCCC. Now, what was understood a lot earlier was the fact that climate change or the global warming is largely initiated or triggered by the emission of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases such as methane, such as carbon dioxide, etc., sulfur hexafluoride, nitrous oxide, all these various different gases which lead to the warming of the planet. If we control the emission of these gases, let's suppose we stop burning of fossil fuels, let's suppose we prevent deforestation, then the impact that we are facing due to climate change, the continuous rising temperature that we are experiencing, that is something that can be brought under control. So this UNFCCC seeks to work in that area. That is basically to provide some amount of control of the emission of greenhouse gases, and also in order to bring about a cooling mechanism over the period also. By the way, all these three conventions are funded by the organization which we refer to as, the funding is provided by, are we aware, for all three? Funding, very good. Funding is provided by Global Environment Facility. That is GEF. World Bank is a trustee of the GEF. World Bank is a trustee. So, GEF provides the funding for these conventions. Now, UNFCCC, that is to combat climate change, in order to prevent climate change from happening, that is to limit the warming of the planet to less than 2 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial era. That is what is the main goal here. So that is the convention where the conference of parties are held every year. Conference of party is the highest decision making body for any convention. So conference of party is the highest decision making body for any convention. So here, annual COP is held. In the case of CBD, or Convention on Biological Diversity, this COP is held every 2 to 3 years. In the case of CCD, that is how to prevent desertification from happening, increase in the desertified areas, how to prevent that from happening, the Conference of Parties is held again every 2 to 3 years. It is in this case of the Convention on climate change, that is where you have the Conference of Parties held every year. Last year, the Conference of Parties 27 was held. So, for the previous 3 years, if you take a look at it, COP26 was held at Glasgow in UK. COP27 was held at Egypt. Very good. Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. COP28 was held in Dubai. Okay. Now, since last year itself, or in fact, if you consider for the past few years, there has always been a clamor call, a growing demand that the developed nations of the world should do something significant or substantial in order to contribute to combat climate change. Because it is the development of the Western world, so to say, the western portion of Europe, America, etc. It is the development of these regions which has led to such huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere that the rest of the world is suffering from. So because they are more responsible for the present day pollution and the present day warming, they should be doing something. So there has always been an increased demand that they should be contributing more. Now, for some time, it has also been understood that climate change is no longer a theoretical concept that maybe 50 years down the line we will experience climate change. We are experiencing climate change as we speak. When we have substantially high amount of rainfall causing landslides in the region of Himachal in the month of July and August, leading to a loss to the tunes of 10,000 crore plus. When you have debilitating amount of rainfall causing devastating floods in Pakistan, drowning one-third of the agricultural land, plunging the country into economic crisis and food scarcity. When you have occurrence of tropical cyclones and rise in seawater levels submerging low-lying areas and island regions. Who is responsible for this? The losses to the tunes of billions of dollars, which are faced by the poorer nations across the world. Who is responsible for this? So that has always been a demand of the smaller island nations, Pacific nations, etc., that devise a loss and damage fund. The rich nations, the global institutions should put some money into that loss and damage fund. And that loss and damage fund should help these poorer countries in need at their time, at their requirement. So, this loss and damage fund was greatly discussed in Glasgow. It was the responsibility was shedded away by the richer nations. They could not or they did not want to take any responsibility for this. Then again, it was discussed in Egypt, but again, that responsibility was not taken. Eventually, there was a wording which was given, but then exact amount, etc., was not finalized. In principle, the nod was given at COP27 in Egypt itself that we will institute a loss and damage fund. Where the funding will come from, etc., that was still contentious. In Dubai, this was a major achievement. That this loss and damage fund that was constituted. It is not about how much amount has been constituted. It right now only around 400 or less than 500 million dollars have been pledged here by various different financial institutions and countries like Japan. But it is that in principle agreement that some amount has been kept aside for the poorer nations who are facing the brunt of climate change. When the seawater level is rising, a farmland in Bangladesh gets drowned due to it. The crop productivity in Bangladesh reduces, people are forced to migrate. Who is supposed to fulfill or compensate that? Where will that compensation come from? So it is for these requirements that the loss and damage fund comes into picture, comes into relevance. Okay, so here That is why it is important. But this conference of parties, 28, which was held in Dubai, was also in news for other factors. There was a lot of debate here that if you want to limit climate change, you have to limit the burning of the fossil fuel, that is coal and petrol. Now, crude oil and natural gas, think about it, Middle Eastern nations are amongst the richest or the largest producers. They have built their entire economic setup based upon selling of crude oil and natural gas. So, for them to say that phase out natural gas and crude oil usage, that doesn't make sense. They will never advocate that because that means cutting your own foot, cutting your own bank account. Right, all the riches that the Middle Eastern nations have, that is based upon the sale of crude oil and natural gas. And unless and until you stop the burning of these fossil fuels, you cannot limit the amount of greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere. So that is why there was a lot of discussion, debate, which was going around for the past few months itself, that whether UAE is the correct place to hold this conference of parties or not. Having said that, there was a kind of a statement which was incorporated with the insistence of China and US. There was a lot of back channel diplomacy and dialogue which the Chinese diplomats and the US diplomats they initiated. There was a close coordination between them, and eventually the wordings were installed or wordings were put that eventually the world has to cut down on the emission or the usage of fossil fuel, but no target has been given that by how much, by when, etc. That target has not been given, but that wording has been introduced. Now this gives a kind of a positive outcome or a hope that maybe in the next conference of parties we are able to come up with the exact timeline by when we plan to phase out the usage of fossil fuel, by how much time. So there is a kind of a hope, but the climate activists they were thinking that basically the world will say that by 2030 or 2025 we won't use fossil fuels anymore, but obviously that was a kind of an impractical expectation to have. It is because of this reason that many activists such as Greta Thunberg they have slammed this conference of parties, that it is meaningless, because they were expecting that UAE should come up with a kind of a thing that okay, by 2030 or by 2040 no fossil fuel will be used. But not all the countries have developed the electric vehicle technology, have they? Not all the countries have been professional or have got that kind of an expertise to talk about battery tech till now or other hydrogen fuel till now. It is still in a very experimental stage or in a limited stage. So obviously, there is a limited progress which has happened in this particular aspect. Then there has been a global goal on adaptation. So it calls for doubling in adaptation finance. Adaptation here refers to what? How to adapt to the changing scenario of climate. Because when the climate is changing, the cropping pattern has to change. Every mechanism thereby has to change accordingly. So, as that climate is changing, that adaptation needs to be considered and taken care of, right? So, plans for assessment and monitoring of adaptation needs in the coming years. An explicit 2030 date has been integrated into the text on targets on water security, ecosystem restoration, and health. Okay. See, all this conversation that we have had, all this discussion we have had, try to understand it, understand the larger perspective so that you have the ability to craft out an answer out of it. Okay. That should be a goal. Now, climate finance. So, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has estimated that wealthy nations they need to give close to around US $500 billion by 2025 in order to help the various countries adapt to climate change, mitigate the damage caused because of climate change, and come up with a newer technology also, so including the loss and damage fund, etc. This is the amount of money which is required to be pumped in, but that has obviously not happened. our finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, when she was in US, she made an apt statement about this a couple of months back also, where she said that all that the developed nations do is that they preach us that, okay, countries like India should not emit. But when it comes to committing on what to emit or giving the money and finances and the technology to the poorer nations, the developed nations, they never walk the talk. Per capita emissions is still very high in US as compared to India. But US is not ready to commit to any curbing on emissions, but US is hell bent to ensure that India, China, etc., they should be cutting the emissions. We ourselves are very keen to cut down our emission levels because we are seeing what is happening in our cities. We are experiencing the brunt of that. So we ourselves, it is in our interest to reduce the emissions. So we are working on that. But here, the developed nations are not helping us at all, and none of the poorer nations are being helped by them. That is why that grievance is increasing in the global south. Now, global renewables and energy efficiency pledge. So basically, it has been pledged here to triple the world's installed renewable energy capacity to around 11,000 gigawatts by 2030. It calls for collectively doubling the global average annual efficiency, that is, energy efficiency that we talk about. So, the amount of energy that you are spending or that you are basically consuming, you should get more output for that. So, that in that way, you will be required to utilize lesser energy itself. So, that means lesser emissions, right? So, this will eventually lead to lesser emissions. Okay. Then global cooling pledge has been arrived at. That basically talks about the cooling related emissions. Now, for example, let's suppose in the tropical nations of the world where the temperature is always higher, refrigeration needs. That also requires energy. Let's suppose you want to store vaccines or medicines. That also requires cooling, refrigeration, that requires energy. Let's suppose you need a cold storage because the tomatoes, the onions, the vegetables, they will go bad otherwise. For that also you need energy for cold storage. So countries, they have their own cooling requirements. Countries in the Middle East, you basically cannot survive without the availability of air conditioning units, isn't it? So that is why the countries, they have their own cooling requirements. But for that cooling, you need energy. For that energy, you are burning fossil fuel. When you are burning fossil fuel, you are emitting greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, causing warming. So, if you have to limit the warming, in a way, reduce your cooling requirements, the level of warming will automatically be limited. I hope you are able to understand the chain of it. Okay. So, here, 66 various different governments, they talked about reducing the energy consumed in the cooling sector by at least 68% globally as compared to the 22 levels up till 2050. Now, there has also been an intent and a declaration to triple the global nuclear energy capacity by 2050. Now, this comes in the wake of the climate politics being played by countries like Germany. In case you are not aware, a decade back almost, Germany had taken a decision that they will phase out nuclear energy. Why? Because at that point of time in Japan, you had the Fukushima nuclear disaster due to a tsunami. Now, Germany doesn't have any risk of a tsunami, but still, because Angela Merkel at that point of time required the support of the Green parties in order to be in power, Germany made that commitment that we will phase out nuclear energy. Now, in the past decade, Germany has shut down all the power plants that it had. But with the Russia Ukraine war which is going on, Now, if you are shutting down the nuclear power plants, where are you getting the energy from? So Germany was heavily dependent on Russian gas. Russia used to supply Germany with gas, and Germany was burning that natural gas and providing heating to the homes, etc. Now, Germany never thought that Russia and Ukraine will come to war, and Europe took a decision to cut down on the Russian gas. Now, in the face of reduced supply of Russian gas, Germany started importing and mining more coal and burning more coal. So, what I'm trying to get at is that Germany, because of its own internal politics, has shut down the nuclear power plants, and the international scenario has led it to a situation where now it is burning coal, fossil fuel, more emission, more pollution, more warming. So, that is where this particular conference of parties has talked about the fact that nuclear energy is still eco-friendly. It is much more eco-friendly and it is sustainable as well if handled carefully. So we will triple the utility of nuclear energy and the generation of nuclear energy capacity by 2050, which is a welcome move. Now, in order to, now there has been, before I come to the India's initiatives, there is basically a disappointing fact here also. Now, I hope we are aware about the Paris Agreement. Now, Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, started being implemented from 2019 onwards. It is a successor of the Kyoto Protocol to UNFCCC. Now, as per Paris Agreement, the goal is to limit the warming. Goal is to limit warming by 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, and also each country has to submit their own NDC, nationally determined contributions. NDCs. That, for example, India. So, what is it that India is planning to do from its own part in order to ensure that warming doesn't happen or emissions don't happen? So we have given our own goals that by 2030 we will have 500 gigawatts of or almost 50% of our energy generated by 2030 will be from renewables. We will install more renewable energy. We will achieve net zero by 2070. We have set our own goals how to combat climate change. So all the countries, they give their own set of goals that, okay, in these, this is what we are planning to do. This is how we are, this is our contribution to combat climate change. Nationally determined contribution to combat climate change. That is NDC. But like that, every country can announce anything. That it is like asking yourself that amongst your peers and amongst your friends, that what is it that you will do to clear UPSC, civil services examination. One of you rise up and say, I will finish the entire portion of GS next weekend. Another person is to say, I will finish the entire answer writing in 5 months. Anybody can promise anything. What is there to keep a check of it? That is why Paris Agreement also involved a clause where every 5 years you have to go for a stock taking mechanism, global stock take, that who has done how much, right? In order to ensure that whether the world is actually following what they have promised, who is doing what. So that is where there was a provision of global stocktake mechanism. mechanism. This is not goods and service tax. Right? To be carried out every 5 years to take stock of NDCs. And Paris Agreement also said that look, you have to open yourself to inspection so that we are able to verify that after 5 years, and that is a part of that global stocktake, that you are able to verify that whether indeed you have achieved this much amount of reduction in emission or simply you are bluffing out in the open air. So that is why for any achievement of a goal, periodic analysis is a must. That is why we are insisting, for example, on the test series also that appear for the test series. So that periodic analysis can be understood, that whether you have actually worked something or you are simply pushing it eventually that, okay, before prelims I will study. This conference of parties was the first time when this global stocktake had to happen. Because now it would be 5 years, 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23. 5 years of NDCs, declaration of NDCs was completed this year. So a global stocktake mechanism was supposed to be developed. Next, the global stocktake mechanism is supposed to be followed up in 2028. In this year's conference of parties, the major economies of the world, they blockaded this movement about global stocktake. This is where India has been working really hard. We have in a way overachieved what our promises were. But countries such as US, China, etc., they have, and even Western Europe, all the countries which love to preach us, none of them have achieved their goals or objectives. That is why this is where it has COP28 has received a lot of criticism as well. Okay. Now, India, before participating in this, India and the government had launched a couple of programs in the month of October and November also, in order to ensure India's commitment towards combating climate change. One was the Green Credit Initiative, which was a kind of a voluntary mechanism where at an individual level, at an organization level, you can carry out conservation of nature, conservation of environment, reforestation, for example, conservation of wetland, any of the thing which can help benefit the environment, you will be provided credit for that, and that can eventually be tradable in the market as well. So that is something that India had initiated in the month of October itself. Then India had also initiated the EcoMark scheme, where the ecologically, in a way, those products which are ecologically friendly, which are not damaging the environment, those will be given a separate hallmark in order to ensure sustainable and responsible consumption of products, so that you and I, when we go to the market, we see that, okay, this is a product which has got EcoMark, means this is a good product that we are going to consume. So here EcoMark basically talks about responsible consumption, right? Now, at the Conference of Parties, India launched the Global River Cities Alliance, right? This particular thing, that where this Global River Cities Alliance was launched, this can be relevant for your prelims. So, all that you have to be aware of, that India helped launch this Global River Cities Alliance, where the twin conservation of both the rivers as well as cities. For example, if you talk about development of River Ganga or the conservation of River Ganga, Ganga is conserved, The adjoining city of Kanpur, Varanasi, Patna, they will also benefit, right? So the twin development of the river and the city near it. That is why River Cities Alliance. So it was launched at Conference of Parties 28, led by National Mission for Clean Ganga under the Ministry of Jal Shakti, Government of India. Now it highlights India's role in sustainable river-centric development and climate resilience. So when you carry out development of any region, you have to ensure that the river is conserved. The river doesn't get destroyed in the process. It will help facilitate knowledge exchange, river city twinning. Okay, river city twinning again. If you're developing the city, the river should be conserved and developed as well. If you are ensuring the cleanliness of the river, automatically you are ensuring that in the city proper sewage treatment plants, etc., they are also installed in the process. So that is river city twinning in a way. So these are the initiatives that India has also launched. Okay. Now, here, what can be the question which can be framed? Discuss the key development of the Conference of Parties 28 to UNFCCC and India's role in the process. So, how do you initiate this particular answer writing? So, in the introduction, you simply have to talk about that Conference of Parties 28 to UNFCCC was held in Dubai. It is the highest decision-making body of the UNFCCC, which was arrived at the at the conference Rio summit of 1992. Right, that will be enough for your introduction. COP28 followed COP27, where loss and damage fund was discussed and in principle agreed upon. Then you talk about the key achievements, disappointments of COP28. Then eventually India's contribution there. We have come up with the Green Cities, the Green Credit Initiative, EcoMark scheme. We have come up with a kind of the Global River Cities Alliance also. So all these things you have to talk about. Eventually, you have to talk about that the success of these conference of parties or the decisions taken thereby lies in the eventual verification and follow up of the promises made by the various different member states. For this, global stocktake mechanism is a must which needs to be arrived at as early and as soon as possible. Okay. Ecomark is eco-friendly products will be given a homologation, right? So that you and I, when let's suppose we get two different products, let's suppose you have two different mobile phones, one of them has been manufactured eco-friendly in an eco-friendly manner, so you buy that one. So in that way, if you buy the eco-friendly products, eventually all the producers will start producing in an environmentally and ecologically friendly manner. So that is the entire concept behind it. Okay, understood? Green dot on products is about vegetarian, right? Meanwhile, in a parallel universe, today is Tuesday, then why means based current affairs? Because from this particular topic, you can have means question which can be derived from it. Have you understood the topic here? See, it is no longer a Tuesday, Thursday webinar anymore. This is the webinar on environment ecology. I will give you the kind of prelims questions also where you get the chance to play the fastest finger first and the Kaun Banega Crorepati moment in your life will come. Where I am sure immediately after that you will ask me that share the leaderboard. I want to see where my name is there on the leaderboard. So basically, I will give you that moment of joy in your life also. But Conference of Parties 28, it had not been covered in detail. That is why we have covered this. From Conference of Parties, generally a means based question is asked. If I give you that your fastest finger moment right now, it would be doing injustice to you. I will give you that very shortly in the next topic. You will get that opportunity. Sir, mix ho gaye sare topics. We are in the first topic only and all the topics are mixed. Are you listening to some parallel conversations somewhere, or is it something which is different? Okay. Are all three conventions discussed in every COP? No. Each of the conventions have their own different COP. For example, you have a convention on migratory species. So I think many of you have not attended the batch of environment ecology. Otherwise, it would be a shame on me in the case. So basically, uh, conference. Have you attended the convention? What is the name given to Convention on Migratory Species? Are we aware of the Bonn Convention? Good. So Bonn Convention has got a different conference of parties. Convention on Biological Diversity has got a different COP. Have you heard about the name CITES? Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. That has got a different conference of each of these. Imagine, for example, you have multiple different conventions. Each of the convention have their own different goal. Now, simple understanding will be that this is the Convention on Biological Diversity. Can the goal of CBD be the same as UNFCCC? Can they have the same goal? Can you think about it? Sabah, all confused, sub confused ho gaye and all that. Can these two have a different goal? No, they will have a different goal. Always they will have a different goal. Okay. So they will have different goals. So all of them require, for example, Convention on Biological Diversity deals with conservation, let's suppose, of endangered species, etc. Climate change deals with reduction in the emissions of greenhouse gases. Okay, right? On what basis the number 26, 27, 28? So, what do you think? Come up with a creative answer, Rishika. What is the most creative answer that we can come up with? Why the name 26, 27, 28? Obviously, meeting number 28, right? Meeting number 28, which has happened. So it started in 1995. 1996 was second meeting. 1997 was the third meeting. 1998 was the fourth meeting. In COVID years, there was no meeting. So like that 28th meeting. Beautiful questions I get. Some of the very, very beautiful questions. Okay. In a parallel universe, Tamil Nadu oil spill effect. My dear friend, have you understood this topic? Someone is asking me about El Nino and La Nina. Someone is asking me about Tamil Nadu oil spill. Is this portion understood? Okay, thank you. Disappointments of COP28, Isha, was first of all the global stocktake mechanism was not talked about in detail. Then, secondly, when we talk about the region of or the commitment towards phasing out of fossil fuels, that was not done. A proper financing mechanism which needed to be developed from the developed to the developing world, that was not done. So these are few of the disappointments. Okay. Conference of Parties to UNFCCC happens every year. Okay. Okay, how many of us feel that learning each of the Conference of Parties from 1 to 28, how many of you feel that UPSC can ask a question from there? That where a Conference of Parties 12 was held? Okay. So UPSC never asks you such questions. Regardless of the doubts that you have, UPSC will never ask you this question. UPSC will ask you question about the latest Conference of Parties always. That is where you have the latest conference of parties follow that up. Okay, right? So 26, 27, 28 follow that up more than sufficient. Now, climate change performance index. From here, the easy ones will come into existence. So I will give you the prelims fastest finger first feel from this one also. Don't worry. So the disappointment that you had about the subjective portion in the first topic, this will give you an easier time. So the climate change performance index for 2024 was released recently, and this is a report which is released by organizations such as German Watch, the New Climate Institute, and the Climate Action Network International. So learn this up. This is relevant for your prelims. Okay. Now, here it is published annually since 2005 and is an independent monitoring tracking tool for the country's progress in order to combat climate change. What is their progress that they have made? Now, here it indicates the mitigation efforts of the 63 various different countries and the European Union. Again, I understand many of you will have that instigation that tell me the name of all the 63 countries. I may not be able to learn, but I like to have the list beside my bed when I go to sleep. Please ignore that list of 63 countries. Nobody is going to ask you that. That is why understand what this is about. So it accounts for basically 90% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. All the 63 countries and the European Union, they are basically evaluated on four different metrics. What are the four different metrics? The greenhouse gas emission is given 40% weightage, renewable energy is given 20% weightage, energy use. What is the energy use? Whether you are dependent on fossil fuel, whether you have moved completely to renewable energy, what is your climate policy? That is also given 20% weightage. So the questions that everybody kind of questions that everybody likes, which is the metric which is given the most amount of stress and importance? Greenhouse gas emissions are given the maximum stress. 40% importance is given to greenhouse gas emissions. Rest of them are given 20% emission 20% weightage. India's performance, basically India has secured the 7th position. Previously, in 2023, India's position was 8th. Again, not relevant, but if you want to learn, you can always learn. Then, in this climate change performance index, the first three rankings have been kept vacant because it was understood that no country has done substantially well enough. Last year also, they kept the first three ranks vacant because, as per their opinion, no country is so well performing that they can be counted as first, second, or third. Now, Denmark is at the fourth spot, Estonia is in the fifth place, Philippines is in the sixth place, and India at 7th. Amongst the G20 nations, India is the best performing nation in climate change performance index, with India at 7th, Germany at 14th, EU at 16th. All of the rest are much later. The laggards basically telling you that India is doing significantly much more in the renewable sector, but still we have a greater dependency on fossil fuel. But our policies, for example, supporting electric vehicles, hydrogen, etc., our policies, they are in a way good and well directed. And also understand, a place where India has got an advantage is the per capita greenhouse gas emission. Our per capita greenhouse gas emission is much lower as compared to the rest of the world. Why is that? Can we take a guess? Very good, Pulkit. Khushi, Pooja, Akash, Ruchita, everyone. Good. So, per capita emission is reduced because the population is very high. That is why it gets divided. That is where the greenhouse gas emission parameter, which has got 40% weightage, we do extraordinarily well in that. Okay. Now, G20 members, they account for more than 75% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So here, Global House, India's performance indicators, if you will observe, India is ninth in greenhouse gas emissions and 10th in energy use because of low per capita usage, because of high population. And India has also been the only country amongst the major economies. India has been the only country which is well on its way to achieve its NDCs as declared as per the Paris Agreement. So we are well on our way to achieve the targets. Now, in the case of climate policy, we secured the 10th place here also. However, in the usage of renewable energy, our rank deteriorated from the previous year because of our still we have an over dependence on fossil fuel. From last year to this year, we have inaugurated few of the more thermal power plants because of our high energy requirement, and that many of them have also been fossil fuel based. So this is where India's ranking has fallen, right? Because of increased dependency on fossil fuel. Okay, so that is why basically you have the case of the poorer rank. Now, here is the question associated with the portion of climate change performance index. Consider the following statements for the recently released climate change performance index. It is released by UNEP along with Greenpeace. Maximum weightage in the index is given to the climate policies devised by the governments. India is the best performing nation amongst the G20 nations. How many of the statements given above is or are correct? Who releases this index? That is what the question is, Sabha. That is what has been covered in the PPT. Are you putting it on mute, Sabha? Watching the things going on. Good. Majority of you have given the correct answer. The correct answer in this case is one statement only. Is it released by UNEP along with the Greenpeace? No. It is released by a group of organizations, that is German Watch, New Climate Institute, and Climate Action Network International. So, Sabha, this is where I had marked important for prelims also. Okay. These are the institutes which are responsible. Okay. And then, so this is wrong. Maximum weightage in the index is given to the climate policies devised by the government? No. Maximum weightage is given to greenhouse gas emissions there. Then India is the best performing nation amongst the G20 nations. That is correct, followed by Germany. So the third statement is the only one which is correct. So the correct answer will be A. Okay. Now, World Meteorological Organization has released the global climate condition from 2011 to 2020. World Meteorological Organization comes up with an overall analysis of the decade for the climate change which has happened. It comes out with the kind of every annual or a biannual report for, let's suppose, oceans separately, air separately also, but a comprehensive analysis is done every 10 years. So, it has published the report titled The Global Climate 2011 to 2020, a decade of accelerating climate change, right? So, it talks about the acceleration of climate change and its impact across the world, the entirety of the world. So in this, it has talked about, for example, the increased amount of emissions of greenhouse gases, leading to marine heat waves, leading to ocean acidification in certain areas, leading to increased land temperatures and ocean temperature in certain areas. All the fact, rise in seawater level, all this has been talked about. So here, you also have to understand what this WMO is about. We will talk about that. So the key pointers as indicated here is the fact that, okay, so there is a question that I will take up. Uh, Jogendra, you have basically a few of the questions that you have asked. So I will take up a couple of questions here. First, Jogendra, you had a question that pledging of $500 billion by wealthy nation. So that is the estimate that $500 billion need to be pledged. The loss and damage fund which has been pledged is around $475 million, nowhere close to $1 billion even. That is different. Now, your other question is Global River Cities Alliance that has been launched at Conference of Parties 28 to ensure the twin and sustainable development of the river and the cities associated with it. So that development is the Global River Cities Alliance. And meanwhile, Philippines is the sixth, so India is not the best. Okay. Then again, look at the portion carefully again. Chituri, you will arrive at the answer. So, Femina, that how India per capita emission is very low as compared to other nation due to what is per capita, Femina? Sanskar, that is correct. What you read is correct. That is what Megha I want to tell that Chituri that Philippines is not a G20 member. Like that, you can say Denmark was fourth, so India is not the best. Kindly understand what is G20 member. So, what is per capita? Per person? How do you calculate per person? Has someone come to your house and asked you that how much you are emitting, how much your parents are emitting, how much your brothers are emitting? So, how do you get the idea about per capita emission? What do you think? What is the calculation involved? Can we say total population by or total emission by total population? Can we arrive at the per capita emission by this? Yes. So if the total population increases, if the denominator increases, so per capita emission, will it go high or low? You guys have to clear the CSAT exams first of all in order to appear for the mains. So if we say that the population is increasing, can we say that the per capita emission will be low? Does that answer your question? Yes? Okay. Can we move ahead now? Okay. I think I answered the questions. Green Credit Initiative is basically when we talk about the aspect that the Indian government has launched a program where voluntary actions by individuals, the societies, organizations, etc., to combat or to provide, let's say, afforestation programs, conservation of wetlands, etc., all these kind of voluntary activities, you are provided credit for that, which you can eventually trade off as well. So that is green credit. Okay. Politicians of Western countries won't be happy in these activities. Can we mention it in answer? Please don't. Surya, river twinning is basically, it is the river city twinning. So if you are conserving a river, if you are developing a river, the city which is close nearby, you have to talk about the development and the conservation of this as well. If you are developing the city, the river development has to be kept into the picture so that sustainable development can be achieved. Okay, right. Now, after this, we come to the key pointers indicated as per the global warming or the decade which has been passed from 2011 to 2020. Amongst the key pointers, one was that this is the warmest decade on record, both for land as well as for the ocean. The global mean temperature basically has increased to around 1.1 to 1.3 degrees Celsius overall. So we are on our way to reach the warming level by almost 4 to 5 degrees Celsius by 2020 or 2100. And that is substantially higher than the targets which have been set. And this will lead to cascading impact in rise of seawater level, etc. Right? Now, the greenhouse gas emissions has continued to increase because of fossil fuel use as well as because of the increased changing of the land use pattern. We have carried out deforestation. The wetlands which used to store carbon, that wetland has been destroyed. So basically leading to greenhouse gas emissions as well. So the land use pattern has changed. Agriculture has also released significant amount of gases. So because of that, the greenhouse gas emissions have also increased. Now, ocean warming rate has also increased significantly, with 90% of the accumulated heat stored in the oceans. Most of it is stored closer to the surface. Okay. Warming rates of the oceans have doubled in the upper 2000 meter, that is upper 2 kilometer in the photic zone mostly. That is, the surface water has warmed up more substantially. Means what? If the surface water warms up, there will be expansion of water, sea level will rise, more occurrence of frequent occurrence of tropical cyclones because of warming of surface water. So tropical storms have also increased in intensity and frequency. Ocean acidification has happened due to carbon dioxide absorption. That has posed challenges for the marine organisms also. We have seen ocean acidification. What does it do? For example, it hampers the building of the exoskeletons by corals, by the shell bearing animals, mollusks, etc. They are unable to build a shell around themselves. Marine heat waves leading to coral bleaching, that has also started happening very frequently. So that is why the heat waves have increased in frequency and intensity, impacting almost 60% of the oceanic area. So, for example, recently in this decade between 2011 to 2020, substantial region of the Great Barrier Reef also suffered from marine heat waves leading to massive die-offs of the corals. And when corals die, there is an cascading impact in terms of the food produced in the marine biodiversity system, the oxygen generated in the ocean environment. Everything is impacted due to coral bleaching. So this marine heat wave has led to coral bleaching. Ocean acidification also significantly damages the corals and the formation of reefs. Global sea level rise has accelerated by around 4.5 millimeter per year. The ice sheet has there has been a significant melting of ice, glacial ice, not only in the mountainous areas but also in the polar regions. For example, the region around the vicinity of Antarctica, for the first time last year, that maintained an ice free scenario throughout the year because of the warming of the oceans also. The Arctic region, the amount of ice there has started reducing. I will show you the map when we talk about the Arctic expedition here. So the glaciers globally thinned by about 1 meter per year between 2011 and 2020, impacting water supplies. Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets lost 38% more ice as compared to the previous decade. And Arctic ice has reduced by 30%. If you consider that during the summer, what is the minimum ice coverage? Arctic ice has reduced 30% more than that. And IPCC predicts that in the next 20 years, we will be observing a scenario where Arctic becomes ice free. However, there has been a success in terms of ozone hole. That is, due to successful implementation of the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment, we have managed to reduce the emission of the ozone depleting substances. So, emission of ozone depleting substances, emission of ozone, very good, Mega, depleting substances has reduced due to what? Due to success of Montreal Protocol and Kigali. Good, Ravi. Kigali Amendment. So that is why there has been a success in terms of the ozone hole depletion. Having said that, due to increased level of warming, there has been significant amount of impact on the sustainable development goals also. Health issues, for example, have happened. Food security has been challenged, right? There has been scarcity in food supply in various different areas which has been created. So these are some of the negatives. However, the positive has been that due to greater awareness, better outreach, this is one of the first decades where we have not suffered a substantial one time loss of life. Generally what happens is in the previous decades, due to climate changes, due to various issues, suddenly there would have been loss of life to the tune of thousands, tens of thousands. This is one of the first decade where, due to the nutritional policies devised by the various governments, the various different information technology which is available, we have managed to successfully reduce the loss of life due to heat waves, food scarcity or starvation. That has not impacted that much loss of life. So we are closer to achieving the SDGs, but still we are far away because still a lot needs to be done. This is highlighted by the WMO report, World Meteorological Organization report. Now, about the World Meteorological Organization in itself, relevant for your prelims. So, World Meteorological Organization is a successor to the International Meteorological Organization, which was formed in 1873 at the International Meteorological Conference and Congress. Now, this International Meteorological Organization was followed in 1950. It became the UN Specialized Agency of UN. So, it established by ratification of WMO Convention on 23rd of March 1950, it became a specialized agency of UN for meteorology, operational hydrology, and basically the geophysical sciences. It is headquartered at Geneva in Switzerland. Okay. Now, again, okay, are we not aware about the Montreal and Kigali Protocol? No. So see, very briefly, if I'll tell you, very briefly, let me tell you that the ozone hole, the whole ozone hole basically is thinning out of the ozone layer. Now, that thinning out of the ozone layer is carried out because of certain gases such as CFCs, that is chlorofluorocarbon. CFC stands for chlorofluorocarbon or hydrochlorofluorocarbon or methyl tetrachloride, that is CFCl3, etc. So all these, they react with the ozone layer, and that is when they carry out the depletion. Now, in order to prevent this, you basically had the Vienna Convention of 1985 for ozone hole depletion. To prevent that, you had Vienna Convention of 1985. Now, as I told you, any convention generally is to be followed by a protocol. So, Vienna Convention of 1985 was followed by a protocol, that is the Montreal Protocol of 1987. Montreal Protocol talked about controlling the emission of the ozone depleting substances, what are referred to as ODS. So, this ODS basically also talks about the various different SF6, for example, CFCs, HCFCs, bromofluorocarbons, all of their emission that has to be reduced. So that is why Montreal Protocol put a target on various different developed nations in order to control the emission of these ODS. These ODS were generally emitted from the refrigerant, the coolants, the fridge, refrigerators, air conditioners, etc. That is where these chemicals were increasingly used. With the adoption of the Montreal Protocol, various different countries, they stopped the emission of these ozone depleting substances. Then instead of all of these, you had the usage of HFC, hydrofluorocarbon, right? Now, hydro HFCs, they do not deplete the ozone layer, but they still cause significant amount of global warming. That is why in 2016 you had the Kigali Amendment. 2016 you had the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. You had the Kigali Amendment, which talked about banning out even the use of these HFCs, which talked about banning the usage of these HFCs in a phased manner. The countries were put in three different groupings or categories. For example, the developed nations, they have to complete the phasing out by this decade. Countries like India, which were put in the third group, we have to complete the phase out of HFCs in our cooling systems by 2047. So that is the Kigali Amendment. So as per the Montreal and the Protocol and the Kigali Amendment, it has been adopted, it is being followed across the world. That is why there is reduced emission of these ozone depleting substances. That is why on an average the size of ozone hole has started recovering. It is not as if ozone hole has completely healed itself. That will not happen up till the 2060s, but as compared to the previous decade, it has improved. The average mean size has slightly reduced. Nowhere does it tell you that ozone hole has healed itself. It has not healed itself completely. But in comparison to the previous decade, it has become slightly lesser in size. Is that understood? In that, but recent studies have shown that ozone hole depletion is exposed to seasonal variation. That has always been the case. Always been the case that during the winters is when the ozone hole starts becoming more prominent, because the polar stratospheric clouds, they start forming more prominently during the winters and generally the autumnal season. That is when in the region of Antarctica the ozone hole becomes much more prominent during the month of August, September, because that is when the winters have just ended in the region of the Antarctica right now. And in the month of February, the ozone hole over Arctic, which will be much more wider. Is that understood? Just one thinning of ozone layer. Basically, when the ozone layer becomes very thin, it is unable to stop the ultraviolet rays emitted from the sun, and that is what we refer to as the ozone hole. Ozone hole does not mean there is a gap. There is an ozone layer, but the concentration of ozone gas is very less in those regions, which is unable to stop the movement of these ultraviolet rays of the sun. Okay, now let's take a look at the question. Consider the following statements about Global Climate 2011 to 2020 report released by WMO recently. Rate of warming of land has increased rapidly. However, the mean surface temperature of oceans has lowered due to penetration of heat to the lower layers. Warming has increased the size of ozone hole to the maximum in the past decade. Let me know the answer. Srimant, environment ecology, at least the portion of the reports, etc., that is required for your prelims, my dear friend. Shyam, no, directly or indirectly, temperature has to increase. Very good. Majority of you have given the correct answer. So in this, you have to find out which is incorrect. Both the statements are incorrect. So here, the mean surface temperature of oceans has not lowered, it has increased. So the first statement is incorrect. Warming has increased the size of ozone hole to the maximum in the past decade. That is not the case. So here, both of them are incorrect. Now, India has launched the Winter Arctic Expedition in the region of Svalbard province, which is part of the Norwegian region itself. This is your Svalbard. Svalbard is also known for what? Here you have the very famous seed bank. Good, Soumya. They were correct. So here you have the very famous seed bank of the world, where basically the seeds, the important seeds of various different genetics of the various different varieties of plants, they are stored here. So that is where India has basically got the Arctic expedition. This is the Arctic region. This is the entire area of the Arctic region. Basically, it is Himadri, India's Arctic research station in the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard. Archipelago is the name given to a group of islands. Now, it will remain operational throughout the year. Now, different countries have set up their bases at around 78-degree parallel, means 78-degree latitude. That is where you have various different countries which have set up their base. Now, in this area, during the winter months, presently, for example, it will be continuous night time. That is why this region is not very habitable, and you require special thermal protective camps and construction in order to allow for proper conditioning and proper living there. So that is why it is only around 1,000 kilometers from North Pole, and it is one of those regions where the study of the Arctic is very much essential to be carried out. Okay, it is the closest of the human habitations to the region of North Pole. Now, about the region in itself, which is relevant, going to be relevant for your prelims. So here, archipelago is basically a group of islands. When you have multiple group of islands, Rajkumar, that is what is known as archipelago. Okay, so here the areas above the Arctic Circle to the north of 66.5 degrees, the 8 countries which lie partially or completely there. So Canada, Denmark, because Greenland lies in that area, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Russia, and US. Why US? Because Alaska lies in the Arctic region. They make up the Arctic Council plus the Arctic Ocean. This is the region above the Arctic Circle. Okay, so which are these 8 countries of the Arctic Council? that is relevant to be required. Now, scientific research in this area has been carried out as per the Svalbard Treaty of 1920 and the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, because overall this is a water body. So that is why you need international jurisdiction in that area. Plus, the countries themselves, their own territorial waters, they govern their own territorial waters. Now, India has been the party or has signed the Svalbard Treaty way back, right? But then basically, it took India a long time to launch its first expedition to the Arctic. Now, Arctic is a region which is melting at an extraordinary rate. If you observe this image of comparison between 1984 to 2019, observe this is the Arctic ice in 1984. Observe the Arctic ice now. Now, IPCC has predicted that if the current trends they go on, they carry out, the entire Arctic could disappear, the Arctic ice could disappear within the next 20 years. Now, that can hold an alarming amount of influence on the global climate. That is why the study of Arctic is a must. It will impact the temperature also. So, when you have the melting of Arctic, what will it do? Melting of Arctic ice means region will absorb more heat. Absorb more heat. Isn't it? Why? Because ice is reflective. Ice always reflects sunlight. Water is darker. Water will absorb more sunlight. So that is why as the ice melts, the water will start absorbing more amount of heat. So as a result of that increase in temperature, now if there is an increase in temperature in the polar areas, this will influence the pressure cells in the polar regions, that will influence or impact the rainfall zones in even lower latitudes. Shifting of rainfall patterns, Now, melting of ice and increase in temperature, this will also lead to sea level rise and so this will be one impact, this will be one impact, this will be one of the other impact. Now, this will also lead to lack of ocean circulation, the thermohaline kind of circulation that you have, that also will be impacted. That is why the Arctic region is always essential to be studied. It has got the potential to impact Indian monsoon, heat waves in the region of Europe, the polar vortex or very cold conditions created in the region of Europe and North America. All of that are impacted because of the melting of the Arctic. Now, this Arctic region, when there is melting of ice, it will also lead to the melting of if the rate of melting is higher, it will also lead to melting of the permafrost, the permanently frozen areas where vegetation, all the waste, etc., has been trapped in the same area, in the same ice. It has been trapped in the region for decades now. Many of the vegetation is trapped in that ice for centuries and millennia. So when that permafrost will start melting, that is when there will be huge amount of emission which will be caused, and that emission has got the potential to warm up the entire atmosphere. So that is where you will have the impact, and the species will also be impacted. Having said that, many countries such as China, the US, the Russia, they are keenly eyeing the region of the Arctic because the water underneath is a rich source of fossil fuel. Now, because it is a region of a larger continental shelf, there's a lot of fossil fuel that will be present there. So, as there is a lot of fossil fuel which is trapped there, all the countries are interested in the region of Arctic. So that is why even mineral exploration, idea about where the minerals are, what is the amount of mineral which is present, that is also of a great interest for the various different countries which are involved. Okay. Yes. That is why shifting of the shifting of rainfall patterns will also mean the shifting of the ITC set. So that is basically why a consistent and an all year round study is very much required. Pressure cells, Saurabh, here by pressure cells, we mean the polar cell, the Ferrel cell, and the Hadley cell, the atmospheric circulation cells that we talk about. So that is which is going to be impacted by the increase in temperature of the Arctic. The polar high pressure will not be very strong enough. Okay. Lack of ocean circulation, Sabah, means the same oceanic water will be in the same area for a longer duration. So means heat won't be distributed, means some region will continue to get heated significantly. That means more storms will occur. Nutrient supply in the oceans will get impacted. So the species will also get impacted in the process. So here, discuss the importance of having an Indian mission at the Arctic throughout the year. You have to discuss why it is required to study the region of the Arctic. So that is something you have to discuss in detail. Okay. Now, Niti Aayog has published a policy framework about the carbon capture, utility, and storage. So, what is that policy framework? So, when we talk about the entire concept of CCUS, what is it? So, it involves capture, that rather than emitting carbon in the atmosphere from the source itself, filter out carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalents, transport those gases such as carbon dioxide or methane in a kind of a pipeline where you can use basically for various purposes. I will tell you about the purposes also. For example, for the manufacture of fertilizers, for manufacture of certain biodegradable plastics, there you can use carbon dioxide. But if you can't use them, then store it underground in depleted oil reserves, coal beds, even deep saline formations. You store them. So, if this is carried out, you will reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emissions which are carried out into the atmosphere. When you reduce the amount of emissions into the atmosphere, thereby you will be able to control basically the amount of warming which is created, right? So, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. First of all, capture the carbon, don't allow it to be released. Now, that carbon dioxide, let's suppose you are using it for manufacturing of products, apparels, for manufacturing of packaging equipments, various biofuel, for example, everything, you can use it. You can pump that carbon dioxide into a depleted oil reserve, increase the amount of pumping of oil, carbon enrichment can happen, or you can store it underground at deep places. The purpose is that you don't release that carbon into the atmosphere. Now, why has Niti Aayog come up with a kind of a framework policy document? That is primarily because Niti Aayog has talked about the fact that this carbon, if you are utilizing it, there's a huge scope for various different job generation, employment generation, and at the same time, it can benefit the circular economy of the country, along with ensuring that India meets its NDC as per the Paris Agreement, as India will not pollute substantially more. So, CCUS can provide a wide variety of opportunities to convert that stored carbon dioxide into green urea, food and beverage form application, building materials, chemicals, methanol, biofuel, for example, bioplastics, enhanced oil recovery, opportunities for circular economy. So the economic benefit will be significantly higher. Yes, Rajkumar, that is correct. All this is basically carbon sequestration. This has got a huge potential for employment generation. So, for example, capturing about 750 million tons of carbon dioxide per annum can create about 8 to 10 million full-time jobs. And in a condition where you have the requirement of jobs for the younger generation, this can be a substantial boost, which is both eco and climate friendly, as well as it is economically beneficial. That is why this policy framework is relevant. Niti Aayog has suggested that broad level interventions across not only the carbon capture but even biopolymers, that is biodegradable plastic, the for example biofuel, all of that has to be promoted by giving tax breaks, tax incentives, etc. Only then this carbon capture, utilization and storage will be promoted. Okay, now, CCUS is important for India achieving its climate goals as per the Paris Agreement, as per India's own declared NDCs, and India's increased reliance on fossil fuel. Till now, we have increased reliance on use of crude oil, coal, natural gas, etc. So basically, we need to understand, we need to ensure that there is a greater storage, there's a greater capture and storage, so that all the carbon dioxide emissions which are happening due to the transportation sector, due to the energy sector, that is taken care of, because that is a source of majority of the pollution that we see around us. Okay, right? Circular economy basically means that, let's suppose, when you emit something, so rather than allowing it escape into the atmosphere, you use that, recycle, reuse, reduce the emission, whatever is the emission, recycle it, reuse it. So that is the entire ecosystem benefits out of it. Okay, is there any disadvantage in storing of carbon dioxide underground? Not much, no. Can we say it is a reform for greenhouse gas emission? It is controlling of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. Now, then the application and challenges of this CCUS, we know that it will help mitigate climate change. It will help, for example, in greenhouses. For example, if you manufacture green urea, you will be able to control your import bill also, and it will benefit the agricultural productivity, then industrial use by biofuel, and by other different utilities of, let's suppose, biopolymers. So carbon dioxide, if you have the stored carbon dioxide, it has got a lot of tremendous industrial usage, right? Enhanced oil recovery from the depleted oil reserves, that is there. Challenges are that the technology of capture and storage is still very costly. It is, the challenge is that it is very costly. Okay, it is very costly, very difficult to implement, right? So it is still something where we don't have the technological tools and mechanism. We need to have a proper implementable technological tool and mechanism. Only then we can implement it on a large scale. Okay, uh, discuss the concept of carbon capture and storage and its implications in Indian context. You can talk about what the concept is, what is its benefit, what are the various applications, Indian context, job generation, significant amount of circular in economy can benefit of it. So that is the requirement of this. Yes, Ashwin, that can be the answer. That can be the way forward. Okay. Now, State of Finance for Nature Report 2023 has been released. Who released it? This report has been released by UNEP, the arm of the German government, that is the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative of the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. German government, just think about it. The UNCCD and German government, they have been responsible for the land degradation initiative, what is also known as the Bonn Challenge, and the European Commission. So UNEP, European Commission, they are primarily responsible for release of the State of Finance for Nature Report 2023. Now, here, the report talks about that basically, in order to combat the various issues impacting the nature out there, you need to tackle the financial flow to nature based solution. Nature based solution here refers to what? For example, conservation of wetlands. Now, that is a natural solution, and that natural solution can benefit the environment. Okay, so basically, if you destroy wetlands, it will lead to methane emission, carbon dioxide emission. But conservation of forest, for example, is again a nature-based solution. Afforestation programs over a large area. So you are increasing the green cover that can tackle many of the problems of the environmental degradation. So what are the financial flows to the nature-based solution? Implementation, if it is being carried out. So for that, the finance what is required, that is why this report is generated. So this report has indicated that current financial flows to the nature-based solutions are inadequate, and the financial flows to nature-based solution have increased only around 11% since last year. 82% of the funding for the nature-based solution is governmental. It needs to have a greater private participation, which needs to be involved here. Now, there are many nature negative financial flows. Nature negative financial flows, that the financial investment that you are carrying out or the subsidies that you are giving, which is harming the environment. For example, iron and steel industry. If you are building more iron and steel industry, that is always going to harm the environment unless and until you come up with a cleaner energy source. So here, nature negative financial flows, basically the annual finance flows from public and private sources that have direct negative impact on nature, they are estimated at almost $7 trillion per year. Right? For example, if I talk about, let's suppose construction and engineering, right? Electrical utilities, oil and gas. For example, let's suppose passenger transportation services, machinery, heavy tools. So this is the amount of money which is used by these sectors, all of them. Real estate, the amount of money which is used by all of them. So all of them are nature negative private finances. Total nature negative finances that is used by the industry, both government and private, they turn out to be close to around $7 trillion. Out of them, the private finances, they turn out to be close to around 5 trillion US dollars. So that is where there, even the government subsidies which are being provided, they in a way are harming the nature, harming the environment. For example, the government subsidy being provided to the fossil fuel industry, making the petroleum cheaper, crude oil cheaper. Now, that is something which is going to harm the environment, because when you burn more fossil fuel, you are emitting more, harming the nature. Let's suppose you are subsidizing electricity which is using coal. Now, that means you are promoting greater coal usage, which is again going to damage the environment. So, even when you talk about the environmentally harmful subsidies, now, there, for example, for fossil fuels, this has almost doubled. In 2021, you had $563 billion in terms of the amount of subsidies provided to oil, natural gas, electricity, coal production. That has increased to 1163 billion dollars, close to around $1 trillion. So that is why we need to go for nature-based solution. More finances need to be given to afforestation, reforestation programs. That is what this report is all about. Okay. So which organizations is or are responsible? No, you don't. You need to have some idea about the data, but you don't need to learn this data. Which organization is or are responsible for the release of State of Finance for Nature report? So UNEP, European Commission, Government of Germany, World Bank. Let me know. Is MSP for rice and wheat an example of nature negative finance? Yes. Very good, Chandrajyoti. Good. So these three are the responsible organizations. So 1, 2, and 3 become the correct answer in this. Then the global cooling watch is something that very briefly we'll come across. Now, this is again a report which has been released. So it has been basically released. It has been released by UNEP, right? This global cooling watch. And it talks about the pathways needed to achieve net zero emissions. So it has highlighted the three key measures required for cooling, how to achieve cooling mechanism. So for example, remember I talked about that cooling also requires significant amount of energy utility. Significant amount of energy is consumed during the cooling process, right? So that also needs to be controlled. And cooling processes, refrigeration, cold storage, medicine, vaccination, for all that cooling mechanism is required. So here, passive cooling, higher energy efficiency standard, and phase down of climate warming refrigerants, these need to be taken. We'll take a look at what these are. So here, requirement of cooling. So medicine and vaccines, cold storage, habitability, that is living conditions. For these conditions, cooling is required. Now, when you carry out this process of cooling, you are consuming lot of energy. For running the cold storage, refrigeration units, etc., you are consuming energy. So if you reduce your cooling requirements, you are conserving energy, because how do you produce energy? By burning of fossil fuel, by emission of greenhouse gases. So if you are conserving that energy, you are protecting the ecosystem, conserving the environment also. So following the current trends, the capacity of cooling equipment is expected to triple by 2050. With current slow pace of energy efficiency improvement, this would result in a more than doubling of electricity consumption. And if you have doubling of electricity consumption, so that means there will be greater warming due to greater release of CO2. So how do you do that? Passive cooling. What is passive cooling? Passive cooling means you don't allow anything to get heated in the first place. Let's suppose you provide good insulation so that the materials which are colder, for example, you have the thermocol boxes nowadays, inside which cooler temperature is maintained. For example, you have the sawdust engrained boxes which ensure cooler mechanism inside. Right. So when you use that, you don't need refrigerants in that. So that is passive cooling. Natural shading, for example, ventilation, air movement that you allow in the buildings. You don't need cooling in that case. So the reflective surfaces in the buildings so that the buildings don't get heated up. So all those mechanisms which don't allow heat to get in will maintain a natural cooler condition. That is what is known as the passive cooling measures. Now, they can curb the growth in demand. Yes, ventilation will improve evaporation automatically. So that can reduce the cooling demand by almost 24%, right? Which will result in cost saving, which will result in energy saving and emission conservation also. So higher efficiency standard, for example, five-star rating equipments, they will have better energy efficiency, better energy utilization. So you don't have the fuel guzzling, the energy guzzling air conditioners and refrigerators anymore. The more efficient ones, which can function with very little amount of energy consumption, right? Delivering 30% of energy savings, which means lesser emissions outside. Most HFCs used in cooling equipments, they are greenhouse gases. So come up with a new different types of coolant which is eco-friendly in a way that is going to be beneficial. That is what this global cooling watch talks about. So what is indicated by the term passive cooling? How can it prevent CO2 emissions in the world? So in this, passive cooling means don't allow anything to get heated up. So ventilation, shade, insulation, reflective surfaces, they don't allow heat to penetrate in. So the energy requirement reduces. When the energy requirement reduces, what will happen? Energy consumption will reduce. Energy consumption reduces means there is fossil fuel which is used to consume energy, to burn energy. So that fossil fuel emissions will reduce, leading to a better ecosystem. Okay. Now, the last, insulation means not allowing heat to move in or out, protecting it. So doesn't allow the outside. For example, as I told you, the thermocol boxes, they don't allow the outside heat to get in. So the materials that you have kept inside, for example, this was used, this is still used in rural areas in order to transport, for example, your homemade ice creams and kulfis. They still use the natural mechanism. They don't use the modern refrigerators out there, right? So that is basically a kind of an insulation measure. Okay. If dry ice is created from emitted CO2, then we will have cooling object. Yes. Okay. Now, the last topic, that is chum salmon migration. Now, chum salmon, that is anadromous. Anadromous means what? Anadromous species are those which hatch in fresh water, like your salmon, pink salmon, bull salmon, chum salmon, even the very prized Ilish fish or the Hilsa fish, which is one of the costliest fish, river fish that you will get in India, where they will start migrating upstream of River Ganga when they have to hatch, and then they move into the salty water, the estuarine water, when they have to grow. So that is significantly an anadromous fish species. All these are anadromous. Now, these fish species, they come to the river water in order to breed, in order to lay their eggs and then hatch, and then they spend the rest of their lives in the salty saline water. Now, recently it has been found out that large amount of chum salmon, they have migrated to the region of the Arctic waters in order to hatch. Means what? Means basically Hilsa fish is also found in West Bengal near the region of the Farakka Barrage. Hilsa fish is also found there because you have River Hooghly, through the upstream of which the Hilsa fish actually moves there. Having said that, so this chum salmon has been found to be breeding in the region of the Arctic. Now, which is considered to be an alarming bell and alarming sign, because that tells you that now the safer waters that they are finding due to climate change are to be found in the region of Arctic. So they have discovered that these migrating fish have been spawning in the region of Arctic. Now, many of the the bear species in the region of Canada, in the region of northern Eurasia, they have been dependent on the chum salmon and the other forms of salmon. So if they start hatching in the region of the Arctic, the availability of food for the Other species will also vary, but this is a sign of climate change. Now, here, mains type question can never be asked, will never be asked. You can use this as an example to indicate climate change, but you need to be aware what are anadromous species. So anadromous species are basically the ones who breed or hatch in fresh water and live the rest of their lives in salt water. So let us take a look at the case of questions which can be framed. Consider the following statement with reference to anadromous fishes. They breed in freshwater ecosystems. They can hatch only in riverine ecosystems. The Hilsa fish of Bay of Bengal is an example of such species of fishes. Majority of their life cycle is spent in water of higher salinity. Which of how many statements are correct? How is it alarming is basically that means that now the temperature across the world is increasing so much that they are finding the adequate conditions to be prevalent in the Arctic meltwater. How does CCUS help in enhanced oil recovery, Vikram? When you pump more carbon dioxide, it will add the pressure into that oil reserve that will push in more oil outside, better extraction. So here, most of you have given the correct answer. They breed in freshwater ecosystem. They can hatch only in riverine ecosystems. No, the topic talks about Arctic waters. The Hilsa fish is an example of such fishes. Majority are spent in seawater or water of higher salinity. That is the correct answer. I'll show you the leaderboard before we end the session. So here, basically, this is the leaderboard. Okay. So that is where we'll end the session here. I hope the session has been beneficial. So, rising temperature, yes, Akash, that is correct. So, that is where we'll end the session for environment ecology. We meet again next month where we'll be discussing the current affairs associated with environment ecology again. Thank you. Please revise. Take care of yourself. Goodbye and have a good night.